Questions to ask you straight off the bat. What's the government advice if you're struggling with COVID-19 and it's affected your eyesight?
I'm sorry, Kay, I didn't hear that question. You said, what's the government advice? And then the rest of it was a bit crackly.
I will ask you again. No problem, no problem. If you're struggling with COVID-19 and you think you've got a problem with your eyesight, what is the government advice?
Well, I think that different people will take different steps in order to make sure that their eyesight is properly addressed.
What's the government advice?
Well, we advise people, obviously, to seek medical advice.
So it's not to get in a car and drive half an hour with your 4-year-old strapped in the back?
Well, as we know, Dominic, and I know you're alluding to Dominic, was given the all clear by the medics. He was told that it was safe for him to return to work. He wanted to make sure before he did return to work that he was in good condition in order to be able to drive the long journey back down the A1. So he took a short journey. That short journey was one that was consistent with the medical advice, consistent with the medical guidance. When he arrived at just outside Barnard Castle, he went for a very short walk.
No, sorry, Mr. Gove. We don't need to go into all of that detail because we heard him yesterday. So are you telling me that doctors told him to take that drive? He was following medical advice?
I'm saying the doctors cleared him to be able to return to work, and he was able to return to work.
But you said that we should take medical advice. That's how you started when I said, what should we do if you think that you've got a problem with your eyesight?
And he did take medical advice and was told that he could return to work, and indeed he could drive safely as well.
So he didn't need to go to Barnard Castle. He could have gone straight down the motorway.
Well, I think that he was wise to make sure that he was comfortable before driving back down to London on the A1, an inevitably busier road. And of course, it is the case that it was part of the National Police Chiefs Council guidance that you could drive at that time in order to take exercise as well.
OK, so he didn't need to go to Barnard Castle. He could have gone straight down the motorway.
He could have done, and of course it's perfectly possible that he might have made that decision, but I can understand why he just wanted to make sure that he was comfortable behind the wheel, and also, as I say, it was consistent with the National Police Chief Council guidance at that time.
What regrets do you have that a senior government advisor took COVID-19 from a city hotspot to a rural part of the country where he then needed to use the services of the National Health Service?
Well, I think the first thing to bear in mind is that throughout it all, Dominic was concerned for the
health. Just answer my question. That would be great, Mr. Gove. I'm sorry, we only have a limited amount of time. As you know, you have other interviews to do as well. What regrets do you have that a senior government minister, senior government advisor took COVID-19 from a city hotspot to a rural part of the country and then into an NHS hospital there?
Well, again, your question, which has a number of different sub-clauses to it, requires a careful answer. Let me give it. And that careful answer is this. It was the case that Dominic made sure that his family unit was in a position, he, his wife and his son, not to infect others. And by going to a specific location in Durham and by maintaining social isolation during that period, they reduced the risk of anyone else needing to have social contact with them and therefore the risk of the infection spreading.
Why did his wife go to hospital with the child then when she had COVID-19 symptoms?
They dialed 999 when their child was specifically ill, and it was the case that Dominic and his wife were advised to take their son to that hospital. Dominic remained in the car throughout and had no contact with anyone else.
Was the emergency services advised that the wife had COVID-19 and she was still told, that's OK, you can come into the hospital?
I don't know. I wasn't on that 999 call.
No, you weren't, but we both know that that would not have been the case, don't we? And we also know that there was a niece on standby who they had travelled specifically up to spend time with, if necessary, who could have done that. That was her role. That's why they went there. Is that not the case?
No.
Why not?
I think it's important to stress that the niece and other family members at all times maintained an appropriate social distance from from Dominic, from Mary and their son. And it was, as Dominic explained yesterday, the case that they dropped groceries outside and made sure that the family were supported in that way. But throughout, Dominic, Mary and their son sought to ensure that they, and indeed did ensure, that they maintained social distancing from their family and others.
OK, so they took COVID-19 from a hotspot to a rural area. That is a matter of fact. They subsequently took it, one of them took it into a hospital. That is a matter of fact. Why did they leave London, I suppose, is another question. You have been friends You have been friends for pushing 20 years, I think. How disappointed are you that a friend of yours was so desperate that he felt that he had no alternative but to get into a car at midnight with his youngster and his sick wife and drive 260 miles and didn't feel that he could pick up the phone to you?
I would never have expected him to have picked up the phone to me.
If I had a friend who was in that position, I would be devastated if they didn't feel that they could turn to me and I could take groceries to their door for them or anything else that we could do social distancing. You don't feel that?
No, Dominic took a decision which was to ensure that his family was safe, that he was going to isolate from others and to ensure that other members of his extended family could provide him with that support. And I think that was the right thing to do. I wouldn't have expected Dominic to have asked me to intervene in this way. And also, okay, I think it's important to stress that we don't know, Dominic's wife has not had COVID testing. So some of your earlier assertions, I'm not sure necessarily borne out.
Well, her article in The Spectator tends to suggest that she has, though, doesn't it? What about his brother-in-law? He lives just round the corner. I mean, why did he not turn to him?
I think because they had their own childcare responsibilities and also because there were other risks as well in staying in London. Looking at it in the round, you can, as a number of people have, interrogate every single one of those decisions. Dominic said that it's perfectly reasonable for people to think that he should have acted other than as he did. Of course, that's reasonable. But I'd say two things. The first thing is that a number of allegations were made about how he behaved, which we now know to be untrue. And it's also the case that what he did was consistent with the law, consistent with the guidelines, consistent with keeping his family safe, and also critically consistent with reducing the risk of the infection spreading to others.
Which number of allegations?
Well, there were allegations, for example, that he went back to Durham.
That was one allegation. We also heard that he'd gone to Barnard Castle, and we were told by Downing Street that was campaigning newspapers who'd come up with that. But he subsequently acknowledged that he had. We've heard from the Bishop of Leeds. He tweeted on Sunday saying, "The question now is, do we accept being lied to, patronised and treated by a PM as mugs? The moral question is not for Cummings. It is for the Prime Minister and ministers, yourself, MPs, who find this behaviour acceptable. What are we to teach our children? I ask as a responsible father."
Well, I wish the Bishop well.
Is that all you want to say to him?
I wish him well.
Goodness, are you sure that's all you want to say to him?
Yes, I'm a Christian too, and I think, therefore, I have great respect for the Church, for bishops, for the leadership that they exercise. I wish them well.
Before yesterday's news conference, there was 72 hours of confusion and mounting anger from ordinary people who followed the rules. Do you concede in any way, shape or form that this has been mishandled?
Yeah, well, I think all of us can look at different aspects of it, and I think it's probably right, Kay, that if Dominic had given a full explanation of all these events earlier, then some of the confusion that has arisen might not have arisen. I think that is a fair point, but I think that fundamentally, now that he has given an account, all of us can make our own mind up, whether we're bishops or broadcasters, about the appropriateness of his actions.
But you do feel it has been mishandled?
Well, Dominic himself said that he regretted that he didn't say more earlier. And of course, there are people who will take on the role of commentator, and that's quite right. But I'm not a media commentator. I'm a minister trying to take appropriate actions in order to support people. If people want to make judgments about what was and was not right in media terms, then of course that's entirely fair, and
Okay.
Dominic himself acknowledged that perhaps saying more earlier might have been better, yes.
How appropriate was it for him to hold a news conference in the garden of Number 10, given the Special Advisor's Code of Conduct?
I think that lots of people were asking Dominic to explain himself earlier. And then when he did, there were a number of people who criticised him for explaining himself in a way which was both respectful of social distancing rules and allowed the media to ask all the questions that they wanted. So, again, it's perfectly possible to criticise Dominic for not saying more earlier, and it's perfectly possible to criticise Dominic for having that press conference in Number 10 Downing Street. What it's not possible to do is to hold both views simultaneously.
I know that we are out of time, so let me ask you one very quick question, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Shops are opening again soon. When is it that I'll be able to go to Specsavers?
Sorry, I missed that?
I just wondered when I might be able to go to Specsavers.
Well, I'll give you the number of my optician, Kay, and I'm sure that they will make sure that you have absolutely the very best in eyewear.
Excellent. Maybe give it to Mr. Cummings as well. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'll let you get on. Thank you.